A man blinks awake. The moment he came to, he realized he was riding a horse, galloping to somewhere unknown. When the horse finally stops, the man is speechless. He was looking at a kingdom and a small village up in flames. He wonders out loud if he was at EOE or Echoes of Eternity. It was a medieval fantasy role-playing game setting that spanned over 2,000 years. Its grand story of light and darkness has made it a masterpiece. Because of its countless items and character classes, even if a player spent thousands of hours of gameplay, it still wouldn't be enough to master everything. Its depth is still praised even 3 years after its release. New strategies are being discovered daily. In front of him right now was the scene from EOE's prologue. In the original game, a group one that includes the protagonist is rushing to aid a town under a monster attack. The man had played the game so much that there was no way he'd mistake the opening scene. He adjusts his hold in his hand. However, there was something wrong this time. He didn't know why everything looked so real. Oh, do I have news for you? It wasn't just the visuals. Even the sounds and everything else felt so real. But there was something more. If he really was an EOE, why was he watching things from a different perspective? There was no one in front of him for some reason. His thoughts are cut off when he hears more galloping from behind him. A beautiful female knight comes up from behind him on another horse, suddenly yelling for her captain's orders. The man knew who the blonde woman was. She was Natalyia Norfolk, the vice captain of the Holy Empire of Eternia's 3rd Special Forces unit. She was a character he's seen countless times in the game. The man questions what captain she was talking about, in which she tells him to pull himself together because it couldn't be anyone but him. Now that's one harsh wake-up call. The man suddenly catches sight of his reflection in his spear's blade and exclaims in complete disbelief. He calls himself, or the character he was supposed to be, as Silva. Silva immediately starts trying to remember what happened for things to come to this. He remembered stocking up on energy drinks at a convenience store to start a new route in the game. But on the way home he saw a woman about to get hit by a truck. Out of instinct he jumped in to protect her but got hit by the truck instead. He got hit by the good old isekai truck-kun. He pauses and comes to the conclusion that he might have died in the accident and reincarnated in the game world. He grits his teeth thinking that if that was the case, then why did he end up as Silva out of all the characters? In a normal reincarnation story, or as normal as they were, someone would reincarnate as the protagonist. In Echoes of Eternity, Silva Pierce is the captain of the Holy Empire of Eternia's 3rd Special Forces unit. That title was a mouthful. He was also known as the strongest knight in the kingdom. At the start of the story, he has cheat-level stats and possesses powerful skills. As far as reincarnations go, he was an excellent character on paper. However, there was one huge problem that ruined everything for him. The man, now Silva's thoughts are cut short as Natalyia asks for him to give them his orders again. Silva focuses on the task at hand. First things first, he needed to clear the prologue. As the captain, he orders his squad to eliminate the monsters in the town and to protect the survivors. Silva himself would take down the source of the attack. The soldiers spread out at his orders. Silva quickly gets into his role. The current event involves the protagonist rescuing the heroine. Meanwhile, Silva just needed to eliminate the boss behind the current attack. He suddenly looks up. From above, bird-like monsters swoop down towards him. Silva clicks his tongue. He circles around the monster as it perches a few feet away from him. He suddenly becomes aware of his situation just as he's rushing in without thinking, and now he wonders if he can really fight the large bird. Just a few moments before, he was just a gamer living peacefully in the real world. The monster leaps up with its claws out and Silva surges forward. He raises his spear in the ready. He had no choice but to fight. With a single slash of his spear, he's able to cut the monster in two. He stops his horse in shock of how strong Silva, the in-game character, and now him, was so strong. He hadn't even used a skill, just a simple basic attack. But he found it to be expected since it was Silva. While everyone in the game starts at level 10, Silva started at level 60. Now that's just more than overkill. He was on a completely different level from the others, so no matter how many low-level monsters appeared early in the game, he gallops further into the town and spots a mound of dark crystal. But he was confident that the monsters wouldn't stand a chance against him. Rifts or dimensional faults was a tear in space that monsters emerged from. Eliminating them was the Special Forces' top priority. Silva leaps down from his horse. He's unnerved seeing the dark crystal-like formations in high resolution. That's one way to say in real life, I guess. If he destroys the rift, the prologue scene would end. He searches the area of the rift and finds another bird-like monster. To close a rift, the player must defeat its boss monster. If Silva takes the monster down, he'll have completed his role in the prologue. It was a giant beast several times his size, but he didn't feel afraid. He smirks. Right now he is Silva. The body and mind he had have experienced countless battles, and most importantly, the man, a player, knew exactly how strong Silva was. Silva wears a terrifying grin. He points his spear, now crackling with lightning, at the monster. His skill punishment, Divine Piercing Strike, completely destroys the boss monster in one hit. Silva watches as the rift slowly disappears. He sighs. With the rift finally closed, the prologue comes to an end. However, he remembers that there was still one huge problem he had to deal with. And that was at the climax of Chapter 1. Silva is destined to die. If that comes true, then this is the shortest reincarnation story I've ever read, lol. His death is unavoidable. In the original game, Silva sacrifices himself to let the protagonist escape the collapsing ruins, and that would mark the end of Chapter 1. Even after all those years of playing the game, no one has ever found a way to prevent it. Some dedicated fans even petitioned for a DLC, or downloadable content, meaning extra content you can get for the game, where Silva survives the route. But ultimately, everyone accepted Silva's fate. He will never make it to Chapter 2. But now that the man was living as Silva, he wasn't going to accept that so easily. He frowns. Dying in the real world was bad enough. He wasn't dying there either. Natalyia calls out to him, asking if he was alright. Silva informs her that the rift has been closed and asks for the situation on her end. Natalyia reports that the town's monsters have been eliminated and they were now guiding the survivors to safety. Silva praises her for a job well done, and Natalyia replies that, as expected of their captain, he had also done a wonderful job handling the rift on his own. Silva's mind wanders as he turns and sees a young man with an unconscious girl in his arms, amazed that he was safe too. Later on, in the royal capital Aurora, and at the 3rd Special Forces Unit headquarters, Silva sighs deeply in his office, wondering what he was going to do. He sarcastically thinks that of course he just had to be Silva. He raises his hand and a game notification screen appears in front of him. Silva is confused. Despite how everything was realistic, it still felt like part of a game. The screen held hit stats like it would a video game. Silva comments how his stats were completely broken, almost cheat tier for only the start of the game. All his stats were more than 200. He wonders if it really was the fate of an early game support character. His stats would barely increase beyond that point. Unlike other characters, Silva couldn't even change classes. There was no potential for growth. Right now, Silva may be among the world's strongest, but facing the death event alone was impossible for him to get through. He leans back into his seat and wonders out loud if he should just run away. According to the game setting, if either the protagonist or the heroine dies, the world is doomed. If Silva runs away, then at the end of Chapter 1, they will die instead. Silva holds his head in his hands as he thinks how there was only a month left. It was completely unwinnable. There's a sudden knock on the door and Natalyia enters. She came to report on the follow-up procedures from their previous mission. Natalyia starts listing off her report about a girl rescued by a unit, but Silva continues to think about the parts of the game he remembered. At that point of the original story, the protagonist protects the girl, who turns out to be the main heroine, Leia. She wakes up a bit later and escapes from the barracks. The protagonist, Kyle, and the sub-heroine, Mia, chase after her. Silva doesn't appear again until the final event. All he had to do was wait there. Silva leans back on his chair again. He frowns as he asks himself if he really was thinking of just following the script. He needed to come up with a plan. Natalyia snaps him back to the present as she ends her report. She asks if he needed anything else, but Silva, who wasn't listening in the first place since he already knew the story by heart, dismisses her. Natalyia turns, heading for the door, and Silva raises his head. Staring at her back as she leaves, or her backside more like, he suddenly thinks that if he stayed alone during the event, then he definitely won't be able to get out alive. But it's possible to change that. Silva suddenly slams his hands on the table as he gets up, calling Natalya's attention. Completely serious, he asks a favor from her and tells her that it was important. Natalyia offers a ready salute, telling him not to hesitate to request it from her. And without hesitation, Silva orders her to take her clothes off, bro. In a list of things that you should think very carefully about before saying out loud, this is like at the very top. There's a heavy pause as Natalyia processes his words, but she isn't able to, leaving her to freeze in place. She nervously asks him to repeat his words, and he does so without any doubt. Natalyia stumbles over her words as she says that if it was necessary for the unit, then she was prepared to obey. I feel so bad for her, OMG. But she admits that she couldn't understand why removing them was necessary. Silva says that what she said was fair, so he'd explain it step by step. Silva tells her honestly that he's always thought that she would be better suited for a different role in the unit. When Natalyia is confused, Silva says that he knew she would be better as a dancer, which confuses Natalyia even more than before. Silva continues to tell her that she's done well leading the unit as a knight, but would shine better as a dancer, not noticing her discomfort or confusion. I'm choosing to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's too focused on wanting to not die to notice how uncomfortable she is for my own peace of mind. In Echoes of Eternity, Dancer was one of the classes that exist, like in the Fire Emblem franchise, I suppose. It was a type of support class shaman that utilizes dances and prayers to the gods to channel the power of nature into allies. Normally, activating skills requires MP or mana or magic points. MP is influenced by a character's spirit stat, but Natalyia has the lowest spirit stat among all characters. No matter how strong her other stats may be, she quickly runs out of MP. However, the Dancer class would compensate for that weakness since it draws upon natural magic. It does not require MP. Instead, it consumes HP, but since Natalyia has an excellent vitality stat, this is not an issue. For her, the Dancer class was truly a perfect fit. Rather fearfully, and for good reason, she asks him if he was joking, but Silva says no. He grabs her shoulders, and with a rather crazy look in his eyes, even I'm starting to be scared, Silva says that she had talent and that's why he needed her to dance for the unit. Squeezing her eyes shut, Natalyia says that she understood and that Silva was trying to tell her that she was no longer needed as a knight. She starts to pull out a dagger from its sheath at her side. She reasons that if that was the case, Silva should have just told her directly. Since it was the captain's will, then she was going to obey. Silva tries to stutter out that that wasn't what he meant. Maybe if you had communicated better and not told her to strip, then we wouldn't be here. With tears falling down her cheeks, Natalyia pours her heart out and tells him that she truly admired him and wanted to be like him. That was why she followed him all the way, bro. That makes this all the more horrible. Putting the blade of the dagger up to her throat, she screams that if Silva didn't need her anymore, then she had no reason to live anymore. She was going to end her life right then and there. Silva fights for the dagger in her hands, pulling it away from her neck and telling her to stop. In a panic, Silva forgot, only remembering right then that Natalyia had the lowest spirit stat in the game. Oh, so that's what the spirit stat is for. Because of that, she was one of the most mentally unstable characters in Echoes of Eternity. Natalyia continues to struggle with Silva for the knife, screaming that if she was truly useless, then she would instead go outside and die. Their hands continue to shake as they fight for the dagger. Silva tries to get through to her that no one was saying that she was useless and not to misunderstand. She yells at him again why he was telling her to throw away her sword and become a dancer. Natalyia asks him if he was implying that since she couldn't meet his expectations, then she should flaunt her body instead. I can't imagine hearing that from your boss who you admired, even if it was just a misunderstanding. Finally, as a last-ditch resort, Silva swears on the Silver Lance that he was saying this because they needed her strength. His words strike a chord within Natalyia. The Silver Lance was their unit's emblem. If someone yelled on the Silver Lance, the entire unit would charge into battle with unwavering resolve. Swearing on it is even more binding than any contract. It was pretty much a brainwashing ritual. Silva finally lets go of the dagger as they both calm down. He tells her that he knew how much she cherished the lance and he felt bad doing that, but he was asking her for the sake of the unit. He asks her again to be a dancer. She nervously shifts around and admits that even if it was for the sake of the unit, being a dancer was still a bit too much. Not to mention that she's never trained for the class before. Silva reassures her that it was fine and he can guarantee that she had a talent for it, so he wanted her to trust his judgment. Although hesitantly, Natalyia finally agrees. Silva is elated. Silva looks around his desk. Why do you have that in the ready at your desk? And tells Natalyia to change into a set of clothes. He hands her an outfit that causes her to break into a blush. I think I know what she's going to be wearing. Oh no. She questions if it was really needed and he simply states that since she agreed, there shouldn't be a problem. Natalyia disagrees with him, but Silva disagrees with her too, and adds that the clothes would look good on her. She asks him if he truly believed that it'll suit her since she never considered herself to be very feminine. Internally, he exclaims at her statement given that he found her body very appealing. Bro, calm down, she's already been through enough for one day. Have pity on her. He reassures her that it'll look good on her, even guaranteeing it. Natalyia blushes even more, saying that even if he says that she's appealing, putting aside what the unit says, she asks him what he personally thought. Bad question. Without even wasting a second more, Silva answers that he wants to see her wearing the outfit. This man ain't holding back. 10 minutes later, Natalyia returns to Silva's office, apologizing for making him wait. She tries to hide her body as much as she can, but her outfit is rather revealing, which is the understatement of the century, considering how little it was covering. Refusing to meet Silva's gaze, she says that she's changed as ordered, and stumbles over her words, as she asks if how she looked was acceptable. With a satisfied grin and a thumbs up, Silva answers that it was perfect, bro. Come on now. There was one more reason why he insisted that Natalyia should be a dancer. Embarrassment coefficient. Depending on the character, getting embarrassed grants a boost to support skills. For some reason, the more serious a character is, the higher the stat tends to be. I bet it's because it's more fulfilling to watch a character who hardly gets flustered suddenly get embarrassed. In Natalya's case, that coefficient stat is at an astounding number, 1.5 times the normal value. Furthermore, her unique skill is treated as a dancer's ability when she's using the class. After his talk with Natalyia, Silva continued to go around the barracks using every bit of game knowledge to assign the most optimal roles to his unit members. When he was done with most of them, he only had 2 more to go. He knocks on a door before coming in. He greets the two people inside who are surprised by the captain's sudden appearance. In front of him right now was Echoes of Eternity's protagonist Kyle Transient and the supporting heroine Mia Hawkeye. In his past life, Silva had played the game to death quite literally. He even managed to win the highest difficulty hardcore modes racing event. That alone proved the advantages of acting as the Silva character. And if he fully utilized his EOE knowledge, there was no way in hell that he was dying there. He was going to struggle until the very end. Kyle moves to stand up and Mia greets Silva a good morning, but Silva tells them to stay seated since they must be tired from taking care of someone else. Silva turns to the bed and asks if the survivor hasn't woken up yet. On the bed was a beautiful sleeping girl. Kyle tells Silva that she didn't seem to have any major injuries, so she should have been awake by then. She also didn't seem to be suffering, and the doctors are also saying that there's nothing wrong. Silva reassures him that she'll eventually wake up. Of course, he was already aware of both kids' true identity. The unconscious girl is Rhea Eternia, the descendant of the founding family of the Holy Kingdom of Eternia, and the reincarnation of the sage who sealed away the evil god during the final war 2,000 years ago. Meanwhile, for the protagonist Kyle, he was the reincarnation of the knight that was protecting her from 2,000 years ago. Is it just me? Or does that sound like a familiar sword wielder in a green outfit? Must be just me. Rhea and Kyle were reincarnated in order to reseal the evil god that's beginning to resurrect again. But for now, they didn't have the memories and powers from their previous life. The game's main story, the ultimate goal, was to restore their lost memories and powers. In order for the evil god to break the seal, it sent monsters their way to kill them. If either Kyle or Rhea dies, the evil god will resurrect, and the world will be destroyed. It was the reason Silva couldn't just abandon his duty and escape. In order to keep them alive, he had to take countermeasures for the event of Silva's death. He turns to Kyle and tells him that he came there to talk to both him and Mia. First, to Kyle, he tries to hand him something. It was the captain's spear, a symbol of the troop. Kyle vehemently refuses to accept it. In the original game, there would be an event after that scene where the two will have to run after Rhea, who escapes after waking up. During the event, they'll end up in numerous dangerous situations and face powerful monsters. With the silver spear, even Kyle, who has low stats, will be able to overcome all of it. Silva pushes the spear towards Kyle again, but Kyle continues to refuse, pushing it back to him again. Silva expected him to resist, but he didn't think Kyle would go that far. He could understand how Kyle felt, but they didn't have enough time. He tries to reason with him, telling him it was just a spear and that it was the captain's orders. If Kyle was to go against it, it would be a serious violation of military protocol. Kyle says it's unfair. Damn, Silva, now you're bullying kids? The protagonist finally holds the spear in his hands, and Silva tells him it looked great on him. Silva turns to Mia and asks for her thoughts, and she admits that she also thinks it suited Kyle. Realizing they were ganging up on him, Kyle collapses dejectedly. Silva suddenly turns to Mia to her surprise. He hands her something as well. It appeared to be a small crest with a lance in the middle. With a grin, Silva announces that from that day onwards, she was going to be the captain. There's a pause as Mia takes in his words before she exclaims. Like Kyle, she vehemently refuses, saying she's unable to do it. In Echoes of Eternity, there was a special mechanism for captains where they could receive bonus experience points. Mia Hawkeye is a childhood friend of the main character and is also one of the sub-heroines. Her attack power is low and is difficult to use in the early stages, but once she's at a higher level, she'll be great support with her bow and spirits. With her strong and unique skill, she's deemed one of the best characters, and in order to overcome Silva's death event, he wanted to utilize the experience bonus in order to level Mia up. Silva tells her to try putting the crest on her shoulder. Mia continues to tell him that she couldn't be a captain. She had just joined the troop and she only recently learned all the names of the soldiers. Silva reasons with her that she was able to do it, so it'll be alright. He adds that she just had to give out orders and it would all work out. I don't think things will work out as well as you think it was going to. He tells her to leave the office work and other troublesome tasks to Natalyia. As a final nail on the coffin, he tells them that his decisions weren't by his own will, but instead the will of the eternal tree that was written down in a prophetic book. Kyle and Mia are shocked at his words. In the Holy Empire of Eternia, the eternal tree is considered the symbol of the country as well as God itself. It means that the eternal tree's will is the highest form of order to a soldier and must be irrefutably followed. Hiding his face in his hand out of apparent despair, he continues that it was addressed to him in the prophecy that was given to him by the Shrine Maiden just that morning. Silva tells them that although their situation sounded weird, if it was by God's will it couldn't be helped. Kyle mumbles aloud, slowly accepting his new role. Meanwhile, Silva is hiding a devious smile since what he just said was nothing but a big lie. There was no such thing as God's will, but Silva concludes that they didn't have to know that. A game world being real also didn't exist back then, but here we are now. Might want to think that through. Mia heads over to Kyle and kneels by him. She asks him what they should do, and Kyle says that since it was a prophecy, then there was nothing they could do about it. Kyle tells Mia to do her best as captain, but Mia complains at their current state. Silva tells them not to be too frustrated. Natalyia and the other soldiers would support them properly. It was thanks to talented people like the troops that made a man like him be the captain. Kyle then asks Silva, now former captain, what he planned on doing from then on. With a grin, Silva answers that he was going on a trip. Later on, deep in a forest, Silva is on horseback one more time. There was a little fuss with Natalyia before he left, but he was sure they'll be fine. Silva is glad that Kyle was gullible. However, he was concerned whether in the next 4 weeks leading up to Silva's death event, the army would be able to grow strong enough in such a short period of time. That battle would greatly determine the course of his life. He had 3 main objectives. First, he needed to make himself stronger by leveling up and completing his armor. However, the original Silva's body was too strong to the point that it's considered inefficient to train him at the early royal capital stage. He decided that he could just think of leveling himself up as a bonus. If that was the case, then the second goal was to level up the other characters. Aside from Silva, the troop members are still low-leveled and don't even have good weapons, which is crazy considering they're part of the military. You'd expect they had better stuff. Therefore, Silva expected them to grow a lot more, unlike himself. But then if someone like him, who can one-shot weaklings with ease, were to join in, the distribution of points wouldn't be good. For now, leveling up will be the only way to get stronger. For now, the third goal was to look for new allies, which was the aim for his current journey. There were many characters one could recruit in Echoes of Eternity. Depending on the method, the player will be able to recruit those extraordinary abilities in the first chapter. But in order to get strong allies in a limited time, one must make no unnecessary actions and play efficiently. The player will need to progress through multiple stories at once while aiming to complete the side story. Suddenly, he snaps out of his thoughts at a scream. He stops his horse and leaps off of it, ordering the animal to stay in place. He peeks from behind a tree as someone screams for help. It was a girl being held down by goblins. In Echoes of Eternity, there's no such thing as female goblins, so young female humans are used in order to reproduce. Oh, it's that kind of game. Still, there has never been a game event like the one in front of him before. Silva frowns in disgust. Right now, what was happening was real life, not just a game. The girl screams as her clothes are torn off. Hell, this is just horrible. When he was still a player, he would have just ignored the scene and headed through the shortest route, but things were different now. He unsheaths his sword, the goblin still unaware of his presence. Silva decides that he can't just leave the girl in her current problem. Silva swings his sword at the first goblin and slices its head clean off its body. He turns to the next goblin and slashes. Silva jabs at the archer. The remaining goblin tries to back away from him out of fear. Silva glares at the goblin and swings at it with his sword, splattering its blood all over. The girl tries to shield herself from the carnage. When she opens her eyes, Silva asks the girl if she was alright. Silva stood before her in all his glory. Bro had time to ore a farm. The girl blinks up at him, asking who he was and where the goblins had gone. Silva tells her that he was just a passerby and that he defeated all the monsters. He groans to himself that he had lost enough time already. The girl thanks him for saving her, but Silva doesn't respond, looking at her stats. With her extremely weak stats, it was obvious she was just an NPC. Silva was planning on recruiting her if she were strong, but seeing her stats changed his mind. He turns around to leave and the girl tells him to wait, thanking him for saving her and asking him to let her repay him. Silva reassures her that there was no need to repay him since he was just passing by. The girl continues to push him, telling him that not being able to repay someone for saving their lives would create a bad reputation for merchants. Silva motions for his horse to come closer. He tells the girl that he was in a hurry, and advises her to leave the forest before she loses the life he just saved. That's rather harsh, but still true. Silva gets back on his horse. The girl tells him to wait, but he gallops away. You could have at least given her some clothes, bro. Later on, Silva looks on over a city with a Coliseum. He somehow managed to arrive on time. That was one of the greatest cities in the kingdom, considered the sacred place of martial arts, the Land of Fist. Even in the original game, the player was able to visit that place during the early stages. There was no connection to the story, but there were a few things that are exclusive only to that town. Silva only came there to do one thing. Silva needed to earn some money and fame. A crowd bursts into excited cheers as a new challenger is announced, a mysterious assassin from the royal capital. Silva Pierce walks into the Coliseum. In Echoes of Eternity, there was a stat called Fame. As the name suggests, it's related to the character's reputation and how well known they are. As it increases, the discounts the player gets at stores get better and they can get access to special quests. There's an arena quest, the Path to Grandmaster. The quest has nothing to do with the story, but it's the best side quest for earning fame. It's truly the fantasy of men, rising up through one's own strength. Silva delivers a blow to the face of a challenger and he's pronounced as the winner. The other guy hasn't even hit the ground yet, but they already knew he was done for. The announcer pronounces him as the winner one more time and he smiles. For Silva, the fights were all just a piece of cake. After all the events are finished, he's handed his winnings from that day's fight, all stored in a small sack. He takes a seat and places his sack on the table. He starts taking out his prizes one by one. The first one is a necklace called Toe of the Great Runner, which Silva thought wasn't all that great. I think it's supposed to be some sort of artifact. He sets it aside, not thinking about it too deeply since it was a random reward. He really couldn't do anything about RNG or random number generator, which is an element in games that is designed to dictate an outcome that is mostly unpredictable, to put simply. Silva obtained something more important. He opens a pouch of gold coins and decides that it should be more than enough. Later on, he's greeted as he enters a store. To be precise, he enters a casino called Fortune. Never thought I'd see that kind of outfit in a fantasy setting, but here we are. The city was known for its fistfights at day and being a gambler's paradise at night, but there was only one thing Silva came for at that casino. Money, money, and more money. He confidently sits down on one of the game tables. Whether anyone liked it or not, Echoes of Eternity went pretty all out on gambling. It wasn't supposed to be a way of making money, but there existed an exception in the game that was way too realistic, and that was blackjack. The rules were extremely simple. The player just needed to get as close as possible to 21 without going over. The night was young, and Silva planned on raking in as much cash in the casino as possible. He plays one game after another. Pretty soon the sun was rising. Only then did Silva leave the casino with a large and heavy bag of his money. He makes a comment about how lucky it was that he won so much that day out loud. However, that wasn't the truth. Echoes of Eternity was made to be as realistic as possible, which was why there was a guaranteed way of winning: card counting. In the real world, casinos take precautions against it, but the world of EOE wasn't aware of that. As long as someone has the time, they can make as much money as they want at the casino. He looks at his bag of money contentedly. He still didn't have enough, but he's already made the amount he planned to make at the casino. Silva suddenly stops walking as he hears someone complaining in front of him. It was the girl from the forest. She was begging to be let in, saying that she had risked her life to get there. The man at the entrance tries to let her down gently, trying to say that her clothes didn't quite reach their standards. I feel kind of bad considering she probably had to scrounge up money for cheap clothes or make ones on the fly. Silva tries to leave them alone discreetly, but just as he turns around, so does the girl, and she spots him in an instant. Pointing at him and in a very loud voice, she declares that he was the super strong guy from earlier. She immediately gets up and excitedly hops on over to him. With glittering eyes, she asks him if he remembered her. Not meeting her eyes, Silva tells her that he didn't know her, and adds that she might have mistaken him for someone else. The girl is almost convinced, but then she turns back to him, sure that she had the right man because she wouldn't be able to forget about the person who saved her life. Silva turns around to leave her, but she asks him to stop. The girl grips onto the ends of his cloak. Silva frowns, finding her to be much more stubborn than he thought she'd be. He sighs heavily and finally turns back around to face her, admitting that he did remember her. From how he saw her get attacked and what she was wearing underneath, there was no way you'd forget someone in that kind of situation. The girl frowns, but there's a blush on her face as she states that although she didn't like being ignored, she didn't want to be remembered in the way he did either. She found it embarrassing as a maiden. Pretty sure anyone would be embarrassed if they were remembered by their underwear, sis. Silva hesitantly and somewhat sarcastically praises her for getting out of the forest safely and finding her way to the city. He asks her how she wasn't attacked by monsters on the way. The girl bashfully admits that she just followed his trail of defeated monsters left in his route to the city. The monsters seemed to avoid the path, so it was an unexpectedly safe trip for her. That's kind of a smart tactic to get out of the forest. Good on her. She wonders if it could possibly be the goblin blood she was still covered in, masking her smell. Silva comments how she was rather lucky. The girl excitedly thanks him again. Silva tells her that if all she wanted from him was to thank him, then she should be satisfied already. He tries to leave once more, telling her that he was in a hurry. She pulls on the back of his cloak again, much to Silva's annoyance. She asks him to listen and angrily points at a pair of flustered casino attendants. Apparently, they wouldn't let her into the casino. She calls it a discrimination against country folk and asks Silva to have a talk with them. He simply tells her that it was written right there in the casino rules that to enter the building, an outfit must appear to be worth at least 10,000 gold, which is around $700 for us losers here in the real world. The girl reasons that if she wore clothes that pricey, she was going to go bankrupt. Silva just tells her to just give up since rules are rules, but the girl complains, saying that she came all that way because she wanted to get rich quickly. Silva asks her why she wanted money so bad. The girl admits that her dream was to have her own store in the capital someday, which was why she made up her mind and left her hometown when she turned 20. However, she was unfortunate enough to be attacked by goblins on the way, and now the casino wouldn't even let her in. She sighs heavily. It was just one mess after another. Silva stares at her in disbelief, wondering if she was an idiot for trying to get rich quickly by gambling. Didn't you do the same though? But as he watches her curled up in a ball in front of him, he thinks of how she was weirdly honest and obedient. He recalls that he wanted someone to help him with small things anyway, and so he makes his decision. Silva tells her that he'll make her work for it. The girl says that she did want the money, but she asks why did he choose her? Well, you were the one who was basically begging him for help all this time. Silva answers that he just felt like it. The girl introduces herself as Roma from Matin Village. They talk as they walk near the arena. Roma starts by asking how he was planning to make money there in the arena. With a grin, Silva explains that he'll earn money by beating the snot out of random guys. I feel like if he could swear in that world, he would have done so in a heartbeat. Roma asks him if he wanted her to be his cornerman. Fired up at the thought, she tells him that he could count on her to throw the towel into the ring. At least she's got the spirit. Silva tells her that she assumed wrong and that wasn't it at all. Instead, he takes the sack he was holding, telling her to take all of it and bet on him. Roma takes the sack, but the moment Silva lets go of it, she exclaims as she's almost sent to the ground from its weight alone. In a panic, she asks how much money that was worth and if he had just won all of it in the casino. Silva plainly replies that it was around 2 million gold. That's a crazy number to win in a single night. Roma yells the amount out of complete shock. Silva rushes to cover her mouth, ordering her not to shout it out loud. He orders her to bet on him 3 matches from then and warns her not to lose the money before then. With her cheeks squished together, she promises not to. She swings the sack over her shoulder to carry it better. Roma says that she knew what she needed to do, but asks him who he was fighting in the match. Silva planned on fighting the grandmaster of the arena. Roma focuses intently at his answer before she realizes who he was talking about. She's completely against the idea. Silva asks why, and in a panic, Roma tells him that even her, someone from the countryside, knew of Tyron the Wicked, someone who was undefeated for 3 whole years. Well, someone's about to lose a winning streak, sending much-needed prayers to specifically someone's side. Silva is glad that she already knows who the grandmaster is, telling her exactly that because of his identity, the odds would be so high. Roma doesn't care, still vehemently disagreeing with him going through with the fight because if he was the slightest bit unlucky, he would actually end up dead. Tyron the Wicked, grandmaster of the arena quest, rules the city on his own. He was a real villain running the slave and drug trades, and he didn't shy away from stuff like cheating or threats. So even if someone pretty strong challenges him, winning is still going to be difficult. Silva reassures her that he was still much more familiar with Tyron than she was. Back in the arena, Silva delivers another punch to a man's face. He's really good at hitting them square in the face, huh? The announcer pronounces him the winner excitedly, stating that even one of their top rankers was taken out in just a single moment. Damn, he went down with 1 hit? Just as the announcer is asking for Silva's thoughts, Silva takes the mic from his hands. He clears his throat. Silva introduces himself before saying that he was rather disappointed that all the people he's fought so far have been weaker than goblins and how he came all the way there from the capital so he could find strong people. Silva then pretends not to remember who the grandmaster is for a moment, talking trash about him by forgetting his name and calling him a wild baldy muscle man. He pretends to also recall that he was supposed to be undefeated, but with how things were going, then he must have been weak as well. He looks up at a section of the bleachers behind a glass wall where a figure stood and continues to belittle Tyron, this time calling him a guy with a face that looks like the creatures from the fairy tales of the north. To top it all off, Silva then provokes the grandmaster, asking him if he was going to shut up and accept all that abuse, telling him not to be scared and inviting him to fight him. A goblet filled with wine is thrown at the head of a slave beast girl. Tyron glares down at Silva, who only smirks in response, having accomplished the first step in his goal. In the lower part of the arena where challengers wait for their turn, footsteps echo. Roma practically breaks down the door, starting to shout at him for doing something so dangerous, before her thoughts are cut short when she notices more people in the room. The people are already unconscious and lying on the floor. Silva plainly tells her that they were probably people that Tyron sent. He warns Roma to be careful and make sure no one sees her talking to him. As promised, Roma bets all 2 million gold on Silva, using his own money. The arena is quickly filled by people as Tyron and Silva's fight begins. Silva casually yawns as Tyron calls for his attention. He tells him that he would praise him for making it there in one piece, seeming to be someone who was at least strong enough to challenge him. Silva throws out a thanks. Tyron continues that it would be simple for him to beat Silva so bad there that he'll never be able to stand on his 2 legs again, but he quite liked guys like him. Finally, he tries to make a deal with Silva. If Silva takes back all the things he said about Tyron and swears fealty to him, then the grandmaster would be willing to take him in. I don't think he's the kind of guy who would be pleasant to work for, though. Silva grins as he thanks him but declines his offer, saying that he wouldn't be popular if people thought he was working with a troll. Tyron pauses, telling Silva that he was merciful enough to pretend he didn't hear his words just then, before he orders him to bow down to him and swear fealty. Silva, still acting rather casually, tells Tyron that he was wasting his time and it was beginning to annoy him. He provokes the grandmaster again, calling his hands silky and just for decoration. Magic starts to surround Tyron. He had decided that if Silva was dead set on fighting him, then he was dying there. Just then, Tyron's magic forces Silva to stay in place as 2 large magic circles are activated beside him. Silva figured they were buried magic circles Tyron had set up ahead of time. One of them was Binding Field, an area of effect that slows down the target inside of the field and vulnerability, another that lowers the target's physical defense. Both of the magic circles were debuffing him or making him weaker, while Tyron's being buffed by his magicians. Just as Silva is thinking that the grandmaster was taking an awful lot of precautions, Tyron lunges for him and delivers a punishing blow straight to Silva's face. The punch sends him flying. Roma watches on in horror as Silva drops to the ground. Tyron leaps up and punches at him again. The crowd watches speechless as Tyron pulls back before delivering one last devastating punch at the dust-filled area. He stands straight back up, breathing heavily before yelling triumphantly and calling himself the strongest. A voice behind him suddenly asks if he was already done. The dust clears and Silva smiles at him confidently. Tyron stares in shock. Silva starts breaking down the battle statistics, how Tyron's attacks lasted for exactly 1 minute, the damage per second of his rush attack, how much all the debuffs put on Silva lowered his own stats, and then subtracting the value of his passive skills. Doing all that math on the fly is one amazing talent. Silva grins as he wipes blood from the corner of his mouth. He's surprised that Tyron dealt exactly 100 damage. Silva also smiles at the experience of getting hit by a 100 damage attack. Tyron exclaims, unable to believe that Silva was still standing. Silva casually walks back up to Tyron. He goes off on a spiel about wanting to do a damage test to help him prepare for the future, but finding anyone who could deal enough damage proved to be troublesome. He was wondering what to do, but Tyron's cheap tricks gave him some decent enough data. Tyron's voice is shaky as he asks what Silva was talking about. "Damn, Silva, you just put the fear of God in him." Silva grins deviously at him, rephrasing his words to tell him that he was just the kind of low-level enemy he was looking for. Tyron is trembling in obvious fear but still shakily says that there was no way he'd lose. As a last-ditch effort, he throws one more punch at Silva. Right before the hit reaches him, Silva delivers an uppercut straight to Tyron's chin that sends the troll flying. He drops to the ground head first. Silva turns to the announcer, who approaches the middle of the ring. The announcer looks over Tyron with a complicated expression. Roma smiles in delight as Grandmaster Tyron is pronounced unable to continue because of losing consciousness. Silva holds up his fist in victory as he's declared the winner. Roma throws up a large clump of bills amounting to 1,000 each into the air, exclaiming in joy. Silva calls for her attention and Roma immediately apologizes. Since she's never seen so much money before, she couldn't help it. Silva smiles a little, internally agreeing that it really couldn't be helped since most people would have never seen that amount of money in their whole lifetime. Roma asks him how he was able to stay so calm despite now owning 100 million gold, putting emphasis on the amount. "If I had that kind of money, you'd never hear from me again, but there would be sign." She suddenly explodes, asking why he was staying at such a cheap inn eating tough jerky when he was so rich. Silva tries to reason that he really didn't mind the jerky, but Roma continues as if he never spoke. They were in Casino City, so they should be living at large in a fancy inn. Silva replies that the place was too far away from the merchants' district, so it would be a waste of time. Roma continued to pester him, asking why he didn't want to eat delicious food while tons of beautiful women waited on him. Not to mention that the people in the city currently see him as a hero. He could basically do anything he wanted right now. She suddenly shifts topics and asks him why he was so strong. He could have even been the strongest in the world. Roma had never seen anyone as strong as him. Silva isn't bought in by any of her words. He tells her that there was still a mountain of things left for him to do, so he wasn't there to rest and enjoy himself. Confused, Roma asks if he had a bigger mission, and Silva offhandedly agrees. Roma looks up at him, awestruck. Silva is confused at her reaction. She reasons that he was someone who saved countless people from evil, someone who wasn't deterred by greed, and someone who suppressed their desires, eyes only fixed on a much grander goal. She changes the way she calls him to be more respectful. Going from Onisan to Aniki, he truly has stepped up his game. Roma announces that meeting him was undoubtedly the greatest thing that has ever happened to her. She kneels down low, forehead touching the ground as she begs him to let her accompany him until the end of his journey. Silva recalls that she wanted to open her own store in the capital and tries to reason with her that the cut he gave her was already more than enough for her to start one. Roma says that she could set up a store anytime she wanted, but a chance to serve someone like him won't ever come again. Silva says that she's overestimating him, but Roma disagrees and begs him again. With a resigned sigh, Silva lets her. But before she could say anything more, Roma's cheeks were squished. Silva holds her face in his hands and asks where she was from again. Roma repeats that she was from Matin village, describing it as a small village with nothing but sheep and cows. Silva had heard of it, but it was nothing remarkable. Just as Roma said, it was a small village not even named on the original game map. There was no subquest nor store. Silva has played the game 1,000 times, but the only memory he had of it was killing sheep for their wool and skin in passing. He lets go of her and shuffles around the desk. When he turns back to her, he holds up a piece of paper with English letters on them. He asks her if she could read it. To much confusion, Roma asks if it was some kind of foreign language. Silva asks her again, and Roma replies that she couldn't. Silva watches her intently, trying to gauge if she was lying, but Roma looks back, oblivious to what was happening. Roma stood out way too much to just be a normal character. Silva suspected her of being a reincarnator like him, but Silva came to the conclusion that he was only overthinking things. Roma, through squished cheeks once more, asks what he was doing. Silva asks her if she would do exactly as he said from then on and if she won't regret it, no matter how dangerous things got. Roma agrees to both, saying that she'll obey and she won't regret it, having made up her mind. Silva finally lets go of her cheeks and sits back down with another resigned sigh. He tells her to do as she liked, but he won't be held responsible if anything happens to her. Her expression glowing, Roma thanks him and tells him that she'll do anything to be useful to him. Silva smiles, rather amused by Roma. She was a background character that may be his key to a new way of beating the game. He didn't lose anything by taking her along with him. Suddenly, Roma asks him what they were doing next. She asks if they were going to another city to vanquish evil or perhaps going to defeat some giant monster threatening people. Silva tells her that her guesses weren't even close. They were going to enjoy some wonderful shopping. That's the real goal when you get some good cash. When they arrive at the town market, they split up. Silva asks her to buy everything he had ordered for her and not to worry about the money, just get whatever she could. Silva watches her go and then enters a weapons shop. His goal for that day was to obtain equipment he could use for the next stage. Echoes of Eternity had many different rarities with various effects. There were a number of effects equipment can have. A player could enchant them with a random one by using any magic stones. But each piece of equipment can only have up to 6 effects. The chance of making an optimal piece of equipment is extremely low. He suddenly stops, finding something he was looking for. He held a sword, a one-handed sword that doesn't stand out at all and can only have one effect applied to it. It was sold at retail, so it was pretty pricey for what it could do. But as long as a person had money, they could get the effect they wanted with certainty. That was perfect for him, seeing as he had so little time left. He goes over to the counter and pays 200,000 gold up front. After that, he went around the market some more, looking for all the personal equipment he needed like sturdier armor. Finally, he got everything he needed in a large sack. However, he suddenly stumbles as he walks. He hadn't had a moment of rest since he came to that world. He wanted to take a rest, but he pushed himself to move, still having more to do. He reaches a quiet alley and knocks on a door. A hooded figure opens a door slot and asks what he wants. Silva casually leans on the door asking if they were the informant, but when the hooded man disagrees that he was called that way, Silva pushes that he sold information, not food, so there was no other way to call him. I don't think Strawberry Daifuku existed there in the first place, Silva. Finally cracking, the man asks what he wanted. Silva tells him that he wanted information on the Syndicate, which shocks the man inside. Pulling the hood over his eyes further, the informant tells Silva that he had nothing on them and to try somewhere else. Silva pauses before he turns a corner with his sack. In the original game, the player had to come there countless times to earn the informant's trust and to continue the quest. But Silva didn't have that kind of time. He touches the wall of the building. Deciding it was a good enough spot, he uses one of his skills, Lightning Blink, that makes him disappear. Silva suddenly appears in front of the informant, catching him by surprise. Silva tells him not to be too surprised just seeing him go through a wall, scolding him for treating a customer who was just there for information. The informant starts to panic, promising that he didn't know anything, ordering Silva to leave. Silva blatantly calls him a liar before offering to pay for the information. The informant calls him the new king of the arena, confused as to how he knew the information in the first place. Silva grins, amazed that he already knew of him, but that was expected of an informant and all the more convenient for him. He warns the hooded man of who he was more scared of, the invincible guys or Silva, who was right there in front of him at that moment. The informant begs him to stop, but instead Silva places 2 large pouches of money on the ground and tells the informant that he would pay him 20 million gold right then and there. The informant's voice shakes at the idea of the amount of money, but he still tries to turn Silva away, saying that the information he wanted wasn't something he could talk about. Silva drops another pouch on the ground, making it 30 million gold in all. The informant looked at the pouches, tempted. Silva offers him a deal. He would give him all 30 million gold and all he had to do was tell him everything he knew. Finally, the informant gives in. According to him, he didn't know the actual name of the syndicate, but people like him called it the Faceless Syndicate, since nobody even knows the faces of those who worked there. The organization was divided into multiple branches and so on. The informant goes through everything he knows, until he finally finishes telling Silva everything, and saying that it should be enough. Silva smiles and thanks him, keeping his end of the deal and giving him the money. He advises the informant to use it to run away. The informant advises him to not get involved with the syndicate if he valued his life. Aw, so he does care, LL. Silva watches as the informant drags his money away. Hoisting his own sack of equipment over his shoulders, Silva leaves the informant's old den. Of course, he already knew what the informant was going to tell him. The important thing was asking the informant about it after earning a certain amount of fame. He thinks he fulfilled the conditions, but he wasn't certain. As he heads back down the silent alley, a dark flash suddenly opens in thin air. Silva watches intently as it gets bigger behind him, turning into a black portal. Another hooded figure, this time with a mask covering half of their face, appears from the portal. They mutter that anyone who investigated the faceless ones would be sentenced to death. The masked figure climbs out of the portal. Suddenly, they slash at Silva, but he dodges in time. He exclaims, asking if they were trying to kill him. The figure lunges at him again with a blade, and he catches it just as it's aimed at his face. The new main quest of the DLC is the Faceless Conspiracy. The player was tasked with investigating the Faceless Syndicate that secretly acted all over the world and eventually stopped their conspiracy. They were quite troublesome. Being from the DLC meant that their stats were quite high. What's even more troublesome were the twin short swords they used. The figure leaps back swiftly as Silva tries to slash at them. Twin short swords were the unique weapons of the Dark Moon. Each blade has its own ability, Waxing Moon and Waning Moon. The right-hand blade is the Waxing Moon and applies bleeding to anyone it hits. Status conditions that give damage over time usually can't stack, but that sword allowed it to. The left-hand blade is the Waning Moon and deals more damage for every stack of bleeding applied to the opponent. If Silva even took one hit, things would snowball out of control. Silva swears out loud, it's my first time seeing him actually do it. He's pissed off that someone so troublesome to deal with had to attack him in a place with little room to move. He curses at the person who decided to add the scenario into the game, the fight just oozing their nastiness. The figure leaps up onto the side of the wall and dives for Silva, who blocks the incoming attack with his sword. The figure jumps several paces away again. Silva tries to tell them to calm down a little, but the figure lunges for him nonetheless. He swings his sword, seeing as they weren't going to listen to him at all. It'd be easy if all Silva had to do was defeat them, but he needed them in one piece for the sake of the future. Catching them without hurting them was quite the tall order. If they felt the slightest bit threatened, they could just teleport away. The figure stood in front of the portal, almost like they were guarding it. If Silva let them escape right then, it would ruin all his plans. He didn't have any choice. He asks if the figure was ready for a surprise attack. They remain quiet but vigilant. Silva then points to his neck, raising his head at an angle and making himself vulnerable. He provokes the figure to strike him in the neck since that's where they've been aiming for the whole time. Without wasting a second, the figure rushes at him. At just the right moment, Silva tries to dodge, but he's not fast enough and it ends up stabbing him by his shoulder. The figure seems surprised that they missed. Triumphantly, Silva is hurt by the attack, but he finally got them where he wanted. He takes their arm, flipping them and throwing them to the ground. The figure lies still on their back, coughing in pain. Silva pulls out the short sword from his shoulder. Apparently, he had done some judo to help him build up stamina, but he was grateful that it had proved useful at that moment. He throws the sword away and removes the figure's mask, making a comment that he felt sorry they had to wear lame masks. Beneath the mask and the identity of the figure was a young girl with dull and unfocused eyes. Silva tells her to hang on and she'll feel better right away. In a low voice, he starts reciting words that immediately catch the girl's attention and makes her eyes focus slightly. He leans down as he recites the words. The girl starts to tremble, eyes watering and voice groaning the more he goes on. Oh my god! Girl Deadass had her own Winter Soldier trigger words. A strange light starts to form in the girl's eyes. Her face is blank for a short while. To finish off, Silva calls for the girl, Mitsuki, to wake up as it was already morning. There's a pause as Silva waited for something to happen. He leans back as the girl makes a sound. Finally, confused, Mitsuki calls out to her big brother, Silva. What do you mean, big brother? Silva finally leans away from Mitsuki, sighing heavily and saying that she sure gave him a lot of trouble. He says she was quite the handful before calling her his little sister as an afterthought. What do you mean, little sister? Mitsuki awkwardly apologizes to him before innocently asking him why he was there. Suddenly, a dark look starts taking over her eyes, the same dullness to them from earlier, as she hesitantly tries to ask Silva if he had told her to be there for a special reason. Silva smiles, telling her not to worry about it. He says that she only needed to do everything he said as she always did. That sounds terrifying, not gonna lie. Mitsuki slowly agrees with him in a trance. Mitsuki was a member of the assassin division of the Faceless Syndicate. She was one of the human weapons the Syndicate created. Her inhuman abilities makes her an assassin guaranteed to take the lives of her targets. Due to a lot of heavy drugs used on her, her mentality was incredibly fragile, but the Syndicate had a trick to compensate for her mentality. I know I was joking about the Winter Soldier from earlier, but it really is like that. She was brainwashed into believing that anyone who says a few specific words is actually her older brother, which was what Silva had done so prior. Mitsuki would follow the orders of the one she thought of as her older brother no matter what. The both of them stand up. Mitsuki dusts herself off from being on the ground. She turns to Silva with a carefree smile. It bothered him to use the brainwashing tactic, but now he had a reliable companion. After all, Mitsuki was a character that started at level 40. That's a crazy level to start with as a little girl, and was also the high-rank class of assassin. At that stage, Silva wanted nobody but the most broken characters as his companions. I'm so sorry to say this, but that girl is broken in more ways than one, Silva. He offers her some candy and Mitsuki happily accepts. She pops them into her mouth with a smile. She holds onto Silva's arm and asks him sweetly what they were going to do next and if he wanted her to kill someone. Silva tells her that she never needed to kill anyone again, much to her surprise. Silva starts telling her that they needed to get back to the inn before he flinches. He looks down at his wound as Mitsuki asks if he is okay, panicked. He kneels down to his sack of equipment, telling her not to worry. The bleeding status of Dark Moon deals quite a lot of damage. Despite Silva's high endurance, his body probably won't be able to deal with it on its own. He takes out a small pot and lathers his wound with an ointment, exclaiming at the stinging pain. Mitsuki stays beside him, worried as he bandages his arm. Silva promises to never let himself get stabbed like that again. Back at the inn, Silva crashes into his bed out of exhaustion. Although everything has been going well those past 3 days, he wonders if he's earned a little break. He turns to his side and tells Mitsuki that she could rest too. She's surprised, poor girl probably never had anyone to tell her it was okay to take a break, and Silva points to a chair and tells her to just sit down on the chair. Just as Mitsuki sits down, they both hear footsteps rushing towards them. The door is thrown open and Roma enters, announcing her arrival with a grin and a sack of her own in hand. She says that since it was her first day as a henchman, she made sure to do her job perfectly. She's about to tell Silva to take a look at what she got when she notices Mitsuki sitting by the table. Meanwhile, the other girl was looking at her menacingly. Mitsuki turns to Silva and asks her big brother who Roma was, which shocks Roma. Flustered, she apologizes for interrupting Silva in the middle of his business. Gotta keep it family-friendly here as much as possible. And with a low bow, she tries to leave in a hurry, embarrassed. But Silva tells her not to misunderstand the situation in such a weird way. I would agree, but we're not here to judge. Silva introduces Mitsuki as his little sister and explains that he ran into her by chance while shopping earlier. Hearing his explanation, Roma turns back around to them. She bows low to Mitsuki, introducing herself as Silva's loyal henchman. But Mitsuki just mutters her title, a dark look on her face. With introductions done, Silva pushes their conversation forward and asks Roma to show him what she got. She opens up the sack to show it was filled with crystal-like objects. She excitedly asks for his opinion. Silva raises one of them up to his eyes to see its quality. Roma recounts her trip, saying that since Silva told her to buy as many of the items as she could, she visited every material store in the city and bought all they had. Silva praises her for managing to get a decent amount, and Roma proudly accepts it, starting to say that it was her proof of how much she admired him, but he cuts her off. The amount of crystals was nowhere near enough because they needed 10 times as much. Roma is dumbfounded. Silva orders her to continue buying everything she could the next day, and if there still wasn't enough in the city, then she had to go to the next town over. But she could still rest for the day, and Silva praises her for her good work again, which means absolutely nothing at this point Lowell. With teary eyes and a shaky voice, Roma promises to do her best the second day as well. Roma leaves the room sadly, repeating her orders over and over. Mitsuki asks Silva why he was allowing that thing being Roma, to follow him. Silva lightly reprimands her, telling her not to call Roma that and adding that despite her appearance, she still had a lot of guts. Mitsuki hums, not convinced. As night falls, Silva tells her that he'll be needing her help the next day too, so she should get a good night's rest. To which Mitsuki happily agrees. In a warehouse, a hooded man wearing a mask plainly states that number 7, or Mitsuki, was late. He asks her what happened with her mission and for her to explain. Lying down by her feet, wrists and ankles handcuffed, was Silva. Mitsuki robotically answers the man that her target was stronger than expected, so it took her a little time, adding that he even broke her mask. The man yells at her, asking why she brought him into their hideout when her orders were to kill him. With a blank expression, she informs the man that the technology division told her to capture anyone alive if they showed particularly high combat stats. The man slightly calms down, understanding the situation before asking if she had made sure to drug him, which Mitsuki confirms. Another masked man comes forward to check on Silva, saying that he was properly bound so it wouldn't be a problem if he did wake up. However, he casts a doubtful glance at Mitsuki. He says that it was rare for her to bring back a target alive and tries to remember if that was the first time. The other man thinks it through and comes to the conclusion that it really was the first time. Oh, this can't be good. The other man asks Mitsuki if she's experienced anything abnormal regarding her state of mind. Silva slightly starts to panic. If the suspicious men overwrite his brainwashing, not only would he have to fight his way out, but worst case scenario, Mitsuki might teleport somewhere else. But when Mitsuki raises her head, she resolutely tells her older brother that she would do anything for him and kill anyone he wanted her to right then and there, even someone from the Syndicate. The man finally stops his interrogation rather fearfully and tells her to bring the man to one of the cells right away, and he would check up on her later. Mitsuki moves on ahead, dragging Silva along with her, and one of the men follows behind them. When Mitsuki turns the corner, Silva gets up and breaks through his handcuffs. Just as the hooded man reaches them, Silva punches him right at his stomach, immediately knocking him out. Silva picks up his mask and puts it on. He's amused that it's not half bad to wear. Mitsuki asks him if he was alright, and Silva reassures her that he was, only getting his clothes dirty. As a treat for worrying about him, he gifts her candy, which she excitedly accepts. Silva then goes back to business, asking where they were going next. They rush through a labyrinth of hallways. At some point, they reach another hooded man. The man mistakes him for being one of them, asking him why Silva was there when his shift hadn't ended yet, but Silva was already rushing for him. Silva smashes his head to the wall. Geez, calm down a bit. Other men wearing hoods start rushing in their direction after hearing the slam. Silva has no problem running down the hallway and incapacitating all of them. Mitsuki leads him down a flight of stairs. Silva asks which cell a certain person was trapped in, and Mitsuki points to the very back. They reach the end of jail cells and stand in front of the very last one, a cell that only held a single girl. Silva calls out to her, asking if she was alive, and the girl wakes up from her sleep. She groggily asks if he was supposed to be a new warden. The girl was all skin and bone, obviously weakened, but she smirks and asks Silva if he could bring her some warm soup and some soft bread so they could celebrate their first meeting. God, the way these people were treating these kids was horrid. Silva takes off the mask and apologizes for disappointing her. But he wasn't one of the Syndicate members, so she'll have to give her food request to one of the others. The girl, suddenly wary, leans forward and asks who he was if he wasn't one of the masked men. From behind Silva, Mitsuki peeks out and greets the girl in the cell with a bright smile. She calls the girl in the cell Akatsuki. Akatsuki's eyes, seeing Mitsuki, seem to brighten and focus. Clarity comes over her and she starts screaming at Mitsuki, asking what she was doing there and telling her to leave before the Syndicate members see her. Mitsuki calmly replies that her big brother Silva wanted to meet her, so she brought him there. Never gonna get used to his new title, that's for sure. Hearing what Mitsuki called Silva, Akatsuki gnashes her teeth together and tries to lunge at Silva, but she's held down by her chains. She calls him a bastard and accuses him of brainwashing Mitsuki. Silva asks her to calm down, calling her Mad Dog Princess. He repeats that he wasn't part of the Syndicate, but Akatsuki refuses to believe him when Mitsuki still thought of him as her big brother. She accuses him of using her to kill again. Silva admits that he did brainwash her and doesn't bother to excuse his way out of it. Immediately, Akatsuki starts angrily asking him how many people he's made her kill thus far, and how many more he was going to make her kill. She threatens to kill him before he can make it any worse. Silva tells her to calm down again, saying that he doesn't know how many people Mitsuki has killed, but at the very least he promises that he has never told her to kill anyone, nor will he ever plan to. Akatsuki screams that he was lying and that he was just trying to trick and use her too. Silva kneels down to her around her eye level. He asks her if someone with eyes as clear as his would lie. They stare intently at one another in silence as she reads him. Akatsuki was another human weapon made from the same genes as Mitsuki. She's the sixth, yet also somehow Mitsuki's twin sister. Because of her outbursts and peculiar traits, she was branded a failure and locked up in a cell. Akatsuki flinches as she realizes that Silva was telling the truth. Akatsuki's skill Liebreaker makes her able to tell whether people are lying by looking into their eyes. The ability also renders brainwashing unusable, and that's why the Syndicate treats her as a failure. She was someone Silva could deal with rationally, as long as he approached her with good intent. She then turns to Mitsuki and asks her if Silva had ordered her to kill anyone. Mitsuki recalls that her older brother had ordered her to kill Silva, but after Silva became her big brother, she hadn't been told to kill anyone. Suddenly she holds onto her head in pain, questioning herself how Silva became her big brother. Silva calmly pats her head, telling her not to think about it too much. Akatsuki finally accepts that Silva wasn't part of the Syndicate, but she calls him an idiot with zero sense of danger who broke into the hideout on his own. Amazingly, every word she said there was wrong. Silva grins at her mischievously. Silva tells her that he might be an idiot, but he was the one who was going to save another idiot who rebelled even though she could have just followed orders from the cell she got herself in. Akatsuki pauses before asking what he wanted. Silva says that he wanted to take over the Syndicate. Suddenly all three of them hear a noise. A large group of hooded figures appear at the cell gates holding swords. They threaten Silva, telling him he wasn't getting out alive. Akatsuki laughs, asking him if he was just going to keep on talking nonsense in his situation. He couldn't even take over the Syndicate when he was going to die right there. Silva smiles and raises his sword. Crackling light fills the whole cell. Cracks start to form on the sword before the attack hits, the power tearing a hole through the cell bars, blasting at the Syndicate members and down the corridor. Silva has just used his skill judgment. Akatsuki stares dumbfounded while Mitsuki claps her hands together and calls Silva amazing. We love a supportive younger sister, I guess. Silva's sword was completely destroyed. He tells Akatsuki that he knew where the person behind the whole Syndicate was and he was going to beat him. She asks why he was doing it, and Silva bashfully grins at her, saying that he had all kinds of reasons and he needed the power of the Syndicate and her help. He holds a hand towards her and pleads with her again to help him take over the Syndicate. Before she agrees, Akatsuki makes Silva promise to never make Mitsuki kill again because if he did, she would kill him herself. Silva promises and tells her that all he wanted was a peaceful, safe, and clean secret syndicate. I could be wrong, but that's not quite what a syndicate is. With a calm smile, Akatsuki raises her wrists. She breaks through restraints with ease and agrees to join Silva. She stretches her body as the syndicate members that survive tell them to surrender. Are they that dumb? Even after Silva's attack, they still want to make them surrender? In a flash, Akatsuki grabs one of Mitsuki's short swords and dashes through them. She lunges for each syndicate member in succession, killing each one with a precise slash to their necks. Oh my god, she's even more terrifying than Mitsuki. No wonder she was put in a cell. She turns back to Silva with an easy smile, telling her new big brother to get along with her. And so does his new title continue to live on. All pieces are in place for Silva. Now comes the final battle of the DLC. A super important point in his strategy that mustn't fail. He was going to battle against the DLC boss the mastermind started. Back at the City Inn, Akatsuki enjoys a shower, a long-deserved one considering all she went through. Silva looks up as Akatsuki exits the bathroom, saying that it's been a while since she had a nice bath. Silva asks why she was coming out of the bathroom completely bare, asking if she didn't have any shame. Bro, just look away then, come on now. Akatsuki laughs, telling him that she was beyond feeling shame since the members of the Syndicate have already looked over every inch of her. The more I learn about these twins, the more I'm rooting for Silva to take the Syndicate down in some. There was no way that Akatsuki would feel embarrassed just from someone seeing her like that anymore. Just then, Mitsuki comes running out of the bathroom just as bare as she was. She asks for Akatsuki to get her clothes too, but Akatsuki exclaims at the sight of her. She pushes for Mitsuki to go back to the bathroom, much to Mitsuki's confusion. According to Akatsuki, she shouldn't be walking around like that because brothers look at their sisters oddly. Wow, Akatsuki, that's low. Before they could go back to the bathroom, the door is slammed open and a girl announces her return. Holding up a large sack, Roma proclaims that she got Silva's order, but she suddenly sputters out that Mitsuki had somehow multiplied at the sight of the two girls. Silva sighs at the return of Roma, who he very lovingly calls the noise machine. Nice one. He tells her to calm down because they were just twins. Akatsuki asks if she was the subordinate that Silva mentioned to her beforehand, to which he confirms. Roma cuts in on their conversation, introducing herself. Akatsuki offers her a hand, greeting her and praising her for being an excellent worker for Silva. Roma shakes Akatsuki's hand, bashful at being called an excellent worker. However, while praising her, Akatsuki kept her eyes locked on her, looking from above, thus instantly cementing the hierarchy in their relationship. Ah, so Mitsuki can be threatening, but Akatsuki is straight up terrifying. Got it. Silva suddenly cuts in on their conversation, asking Roma if she got what he asked for. Roma excitedly drops the sack on the ground. The sack was filled with more of those crystal-like objects, almost overflowing with it. Roma tells him that she had gone to every nearby city just like he said. Silva is amazed at the amount, going well over what he needed. He praises Roma for a good job since it must have been tough gathering that many in such a short time. He notices the wobbly smile on Roma's face. Silva hesitantly asks why she was smirking like that, and Roma explains that it was her first time hearing him praise her directly. She bashfully apologizes before saying that although she gathered all those stones, she had no idea what they were for. Silva explains that they were called flash stones. Covering his eyes, he takes one of the stones in his hands and crushes it. The room is overtaken by a flash, pun intended, of bright light. Roma flinches and stumbles in place, exclaiming that it was so bright that it hurt her eyes. Silva belatedly apologizes, bro, she could have gone blind. The least you could have done was warn her. Rubbing at her irritated eyes, she asks him not to surprise her again in a similar way before asking him what he planned on using them for. Silva dodges the question completely before thanking her again for her hard work. He puts her on standby until he gives her his next orders. Roma is a little dejected as she shuffles out of the room, but she follows his words anyway. As Roma leaves, Akatsuki and Mitsuki re-enter, now wearing their full gear, thank God. They both smile at Silva. They had arrived at the finale of that part of the game stage, the battle with the mastermind of the Syndicate. Silva punches his palm with a fist. All three of them are fired up as Silva announces that they are getting the DLC over and done with. Later on, Akatsuki looks on in disbelief as they arrive at their destination, the ruins of what looked to be an old town. She questions if the Syndicate mastermind really was there. Silva reassures her, asking how many times he had to say so. He hadn't expected her to be such a worrywart, but Akatsuki reasons it wasn't exactly the kind of place she expected since it wasn't even named on any maps. Silva reassures her again that they were there. Akatsuki and Mitsuki cast worried looks at each other. The mastermind had multiple bases he could be at, but with a few pieces of information a player can calculate which one. First, there was the location of the Syndicate. Another is the equipment Mitsuki has when you meet her. She always carries the unique weapon Dark Moon and wears the full Faceless Assassin set, but her necklace will randomly change between 3 different varieties. That time, she had chosen to wear the plain necklace. Considering the location of the Syndicate's base, the mastermind was 100% guaranteed to be there. Akatsuki turns to Silva, asking him why he was wearing such a strange outfit. Silva looked down at the chestplate he wore and said it was fine since it was the new equipment he just bought. Mitsuki hypes him up, saying that her big brother looked cool. Silva appreciates her words so much that he gives her candy for being good. At least he's mostly acting like a proper older brother. We give him props for that much. Akatsuki sighs heavily, asking why he was acting so carefree when they were about to fight an incredible person. They stop walking and Silva tells them that they were getting inside a well. There was nothing special about it, so Akatsuki hesitantly asks if he was lying. Down below, they enter a cavern with strange spiked rocks. Eventually, it leads to what looks like a throne room. Mitsuki and Akatsuki look around, amazed at such an odd-looking place. Suddenly, a voice rings out, welcoming them and saying it had been a long while since their mausoleum last had visitors. Akatsuki and Mitsuki immediately take battle stances, readying their weapons, but Silva is grinning in excitement, because right before them was the leader of the Syndicate and the final boss of the DLC. The voice calls out their identities. Experimental Body Number 6, Akatsuki, and Experimental Body Number 7, Mitsuki. They tell them that seeing that the two have made it that far, they've been raised well. They were happy to see that the twins were betraying him. Finally, the voice calls recognizes Silva Pierce, the captain of the 3rd Special Task Force of the Holy Eternia Kingdom. A looming hooded figure with their face fully covered by a mask stood before them, carrying a staff. He was the Syndicate mastermind. The Syndicate mastermind says that it seemed the servant of the Eternal Tree, Silver Wolf, had quite the sharp nose before praising Silva for finding him. Silva, on the other hand, is completely awestruck. He had never heard the line before. It must have been super rare since Silva usually dies in the prologue and he was in the DLC at the moment. He had never thought that a player would get such a line if they brought him there. Glad to see that you never lost that gamer spirit, Silva. The mastermind continues that he must have sacrificed much to make it that far, experiencing immense suffering. Silva cuts his monologue short, plainly stating that they hadn't experienced much given that it was only the 5th day. The mastermind is confused. The mastermind repeats his words, and again Silva replies that it's only been 5 days since he started. Damn, Silva, it's only been 5 days? You're speedrunning the game at a terrifying pace. Mitsuki and Akatsuki are just as confused as the Syndicate mastermind. The mastermind ignores Silva's words, which Silva doesn't fail to notice, before again praising them for finally finding him. But the mastermind says that he also has made many sacrifices for his grand goal. He takes off his mask. With a shriek from his disfigured face, he announces that he was able to finally achieve what he was hoping for. He shows them a menacing crystal-like object. It was something that once sent the world spiraling into fear. The Anima Stone almost said Anime Stone there. It was sealed with the greatest discrepancy of the power there ever was, a fragment of Telos, the god of destruction's power. Silva smiles almost angrily as he listens to the mastermind, making a comment that the boss was already dropping spoilers everywhere when they were still in the middle of the first chapter of the main story. Normally I would agree that no one likes spoilers, but you have no one to blame but yourself, Silva. You're the one who jumped straight to the DLC. The crystal is crushed as the boss ends his great speech. Magic bursts all around the cavern and Silva pulls out his sword. The mastermind gurgles out groans and screams as the magic eats at him. It quickly consumes him. A skull-like creature comes out from the fog of magic. When the fog completely clears, what remains is a horrid creature with no eyes and almost all teeth. Its body is skin and bone, faces screaming in horror scattered across every surface. Since he was the final boss of the DLC, he was supremely strong. The horrible monster stands before the group, slowly inching closer. All of the boss's stats were insanely high and his attack patterns are varied and complicated. Many of his attacks are insta-kills as well. This guy might as well have been a Dark Souls boss from looks to attacks, oof. The fights are split into 3 phases, each with more attack patterns than the last. In addition, the whole battle has tons of annoying gimmicks to it. He's known to be the biggest pain in the ass to fight in the entire game, but that was only if the player fought him in a normal way, which Silva, now with Akatsuki and Mitsuki at his side, had no intention of doing. Akatsuki nervously turns to Silva, asking if they could really win when the enemy seemed so strong. Silva reassures her that things were going to be alright, telling her to look him in the eyes to see if he was lying, that he had things under control. Akatsuki grins at his words, and because she saw no lie from him, the monster that was once the mastermind screams, shouting that his new world was beginning to stir. I thought his monologues were over, but that would have been too convenient. He announces that with their deaths, the Age of Light was coming to an end. Holding a flash stone in one hand and his sword in the other, Silva exclaims that it was too bad for the boss because he wasn't going to get a single turn in the fight. Telling him to watch closely, Silva crushes the flash stone. That's a good joke, not gonna lie. The whole room immediately brightens with light and the monster shrieks as it reaches him. Before he could react, Silva slashes at his body. The monster is hurt but says that it was nothing compared to his. His words are cut short and he's hit by another pain. The lights released by the flash stones had the holy attribute and inflicted stun status on monsters. It's only supposed to work on low-level trash monsters, but it also seemed to work on the mastermind right after he absorbed the power of darkness for some reason. Maybe because in spirit he was just a little goblin too. Silva crushes another flash stone that stuns the monster. The stun only lasts 0.75 seconds. The flash stone takes 0.4 seconds to activate, so it was really hard maintaining the stun while fighting. But that was why every single piece of equipment he was wearing had attack speed as their effects. Together with his skills and class, his attack speed bonus was 200%. That meant he could attack 3 times faster than usual. In other words, he can just barely attack and reuse another flash stone. He needs to be extra precise for that though, so that definitely deserves some praise. The monster screams more, exclaiming that there was no way there could be such a ridiculous way of fighting. Ridiculous, but definitely effective, I'd say. Silva reassures him that there was. After all, he had a total of 431 flash stones, so he should try to endure all of them. The monster that was once the mastermind is in disbelief. Silva only needed about 300, but Roma did far better than he had hoped. Get that well-earned rest, Roma. You more than deserved it. The monster groans as it tries to fight back, telling Silva not to get carried away. He suddenly starts chanting, calling for ancestral spirits from beneath them. The ground suddenly starts cracking open as something crawls out. The gimmick of that stage was the summoning of the phantoms of the masterminds of the past. Multiple skeletons make their way to the surface. They would normally be a pain to fight, but it was too bad for the enemies as Silva and his group had prepared for fighting the minions too. Akatsuki and Mitsuki are ready and rush into the fray.